In today's episode of A Really Good Sex Chat, I'm talking with Rob Duff-Silsby, a sexual assistive technology designer, and we're chatting about accessible design, what makes for good assistive tech, and the learnings that he's had along the way. As Rob's been designing and learning from one prototype to the next, he reflects on what it takes to create sexual assistive tech and listening to the community about their needs, wishes, and wants. So let's get into the chat. Welcome to A Really Good Sex Chat, a podcast aiming to open up conversations about disability and sexuality. I'm your host, Candice Care-Unger, psychosexual therapist and specialist social worker at Care Rehab. Join us as we have frank conversations about sexuality, disability, fertility, pleasure, dating, and everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by Care Rehab and recorded on Worimi country. Welcome, Rob, to A Really Good Sex Chat. It's great to have you with us today.
It's my pleasure, Candice. I'm a big fan.
We have followed each other virtually in a social media, LinkedIn capacity. This is our first time actually chatting together. So as we get to know each other a little bit, everyone else will get to know you as well, which is really cool. I think one of the things I've been really curious about is how you got into this whole area of sex toy design, accessible design, kind of building sex toys, because that's really what our theme is today. We're talking about assistive tech. I'm a huge fan. I say sex tech is assistive tech. And so how is it that assistive tech can help people with disability or acquired disability? And yeah, I'm just curious as to what got you into this space.
Yeah, I've had a bit of a strange path, really. I was working in construction for a really long time, but decided I didn't really feel like that's what I wanted to do for my entire life. So while I was working construction, I did a psychology degree, but found that I really struggled with the interaction with people, which is an important part of a psychology degree.
Unless you just want to do stats, and then it's fine.
Yeah, which I do like stats, but not enough to just do that 7 days a week.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I decided to sort of change direction once I finished my degree, and I went into marketing. And I was lucky enough to get an internship at a healthcare company here in Perth, disability service provider. They were in the early stages in the startup phase when I came on and helped with the growth marketing. It's a really great team, really thinks about things differently in the disability space. The CEO's a physio, and he just came into the office one day and was a bit frustrated with the lack of assistive technology around the sexual wellness space. We sort of said, how hard can it be? And decided to launch our sex toy. So I still work there part-time at Ascend Health. And then we launched our first sex toy a few years ago now. Saw the interest that people had. The feedback that we got was amazing, and just really excited now to bring out more products because I love the conversations I have with people. It's amazing to get people's reactions when you talk about building accessible sex toys. It's really great.
Yeah, you're probably the guy at the dinner table who people either draw to or run the hell away from and go and stay clear away from Rob because you'll just want to talk about weird kinky stuff that nobody else wants to talk about.
Yeah. You probably get that too, I'm sure.
I get that as well, yeah. And you kind of pick your audience, right, about who you tell what you do. I'm sure sometimes you'll just say I'm in construction because you're still in construction. You're just constructing a different type of...
Exactly. I am still a little guarded about how I start a conversation with someone, but I have not met anyone who has been like shocked or said the conversation's ended. People think, yeah, I never even thought that someone would do that. And it makes so much sense. There's never any negative feedback, but you're always a little guarded when you start those conversations for some reason.
Yeah, who are you going to talk to about it? So that is a bit of a change, though, from construction to psychology to marketing to sex toy production. And by the sounds of it, it's sort of been a bit opportunistic, like the right people at the right place and just going with whatever the need was.
Yeah. And I think the key for me has been that I haven't jumped into something without thinking about it or being around other people before I start. So yeah, it's the right people at the right time, but there's a big lead up to that sort of change where you're testing the water, you're having conversations. I went to lots of events. I still go to a lot of events for startups and anything around disability. So it just feels really quick, but there's been a long process in between.
Yeah. I mean, attending things, understanding the conversation, understanding what the need is an important part of that whole market testing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't have a disability, so it is hard for someone like me to truly understand other people's needs or their experiences. You have to have those conversations to be able to get to that point.
So tell me, what have you learned along the way when you were thinking about, when that physio came to you and said, the sexual wellness industry has got a big gap? What then? What comes next?
I think one of the lucky things with the role that I have with Ascend Health and doing this at the same time is that I share space with a lot of therapists. Ascend has 15 odd therapists plus 100 odd support workers here in Perth. So I actually sit in the office with all these professionals, experienced professionals. And with disability, one therapist will have experience or a good understanding of, 10, 20, 30 participants that they support. So you can get really quick feedback about an idea. You can test something with a small group of people, which gives you feedback to a really large group. So before you even go and start talking to people, you have some insights as to what sort of direction you should go. It's much easier than trying to step into a group of 100 people and trying to get all their feedback at once. You can just focus on that small group to start with.
Yeah.
And so it's super helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So you're drawing on the professionals around you in terms of thematically what they're seeing, what issues there might be. And so specifically with designing a sex toy, do you kind of say, what do you say? What do you need?
The other sort of thing that people have to deal with at the moment is there are very small, there's only 2 or 3 products or sex toys in particular that have been designed with accessibility in mind. So what people have to do is they have to go out and adapt other devices to meet certain physical or psychosocial disabilities. So there's people out there that in forums talking about, oh, this is how I use this device. And there's even people saying it would be great if this device had this feature or they could change it this way. So there's already quite a lot of commentary out there around how people need to adapt other toys. So you can draw on those ideas to create something new. So that's where I definitely have found to be the most helpful.
Rolling the internet and finding all those forums and seeing what people are doing and what modifications and adaptations they're making already.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's always my first step. It's spoken to the therapist. Then you look at how people are using other products out there. And then you can go to the drawing board and start creating some designs and see where that leads you.
Cool. Okay. So with the products that you've designed so far, what's been your desired outcome?
When we started with Luddy, which was the first company that we launched the Ziggy for, we really set out to try to make something that could be used by as many people as possible. Disability obviously is a challenge because there's such a broad spectrum of abilities out there. So to make one product that meets everyone's needs is impossible. And there are people that have done it, especially for sex toys. They've spent 4 or 5 years researching, getting user feedback, going backwards and forwards with designers, manufacturers, and nothing happens for such a long period of time. And you just go in a circle with no real positive outcome for the people that actually need your product. So we were very conscious. We wanted to launch something really quickly. We had to do it in 12 months and to try and meet a really broad spectrum of needs as best we could, knowing that we would deliver more toys that would be different, more accessible, depending on what sort of feedback we got and where the demand was. But the challenge that we sort of had with that is that when you are trying to make something for as many people as possible, you tend to not meet those needs as good as you possibly could.
Yeah. So it's that saying like the jack of all trades and the master of none.
Exactly.
It's a very general option, but not necessarily specific for anybody.
That's right. Yeah. So we had really good feedback when we launched it, and I was lucky enough to be able to take it to expos to demo the product before we actually went into production. So I did get some really good feedback, and it gave us the validity we needed to actually launch. But definitely the lessons along the way have been you can make things a bit too broad, and what we ended up doing was making a really great product, but there was a really small number of people that actually got some benefit from it. So that's where you've got to start iterating and creating more products as you go along.
Yeah. I use a lot of sex tech, a lot of assistive tech. The people who work with us for a variety of reasons are going to need assistive tech. And there's definitely some products that you like drift towards because of their accessibility features. I'm a huge fan. This is an unsponsored podcast, but I'm a huge fan of like everything that comes out of Fun Factory. Like the Germans just really know how to make a good sex toy. The hand grip, the raised buttons, the just aesthetics of it, like good job there. But there's different toys for different needs, right? And so our approach, this is as clinicians trying to learn more about sex tech, was, well, let's all just go do a big road trip to a sex shop, like an adult store. So this is when I was working on the wards, and there was like 2 carloads of us in our branded uniforms and our branded cars from the hospital turning up to the local sex store going, hi, can you please teach us? And the retailer was just so generous with her time. She went around and talked to every single product in that store. And really 2 hours in of just being in this adult store and being coached as to all of the different features it had. So before you went into launching toys and making toys, were you like hanging out in the shops, learning everything about everything that already existed? Like, what were you doing?
No, I think it's probably one of the features of founders in particular is they tend to jump in before they sort of think a lot of the time. And we had the clinical expertise. One of the founders of Luddy was a physiotherapist with a lot of experience. So we had the clinical knowledge and we assumed that that's probably all we really needed. And I think that's actually helpful in some respects. You're not out there looking at other products and putting yourself in sort of a box. And it tends to be, people do complain about the lack of creativity in the sex toy space, that people tend to follow a similar design. Dildos are shaped like penises. Not everyone wants a penis shaped sex toy, but that's the industry standard. Continues to go down that path. And so we were quite lucky. We sort of started without that background and that gave us an advantage. But since then, going into adult shops, I'm glad you brought that up because people still have quite a misconception about what stores are like. And I really like going to stores. Whenever I go to a new place, I'll go and see as many as I can because people are so friendly, they're so knowledgeable.
So generous with their time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I've been into an adult shop here in Perth in Fremantle and on a weekend, and the types of people that come through are just not what we expect. You know, there's young people coming through shopping new products. There's older couples coming through to add something to their relationship. There's all types of genders that stores are supporting. Disability as well. There's certain stores that just are next level when it comes to their support for people with disabilities. Especially in Melbourne, there's a couple like Passion Fruit that just
Beautiful.
they hire people that are studying sexology and all sorts of degrees to help people, and just their knowledge is on another level.
Yeah, it's not the 90s anymore. I remember we all walked in and we were like, the floor's not sticky. It's not meeting our expectations. I mean, it was like a purple kind of painted room. It had a ramp to the door and then it had a stair lift to get in, which shocked all of us that we're like, oh, this is actually like a purpose-built building. And then all the products were just laid out like typical retail. I was like, there's nothing here that met any of my expectations. I was already studying sexology before I went to my first sex shop. And one of my colleagues, so shout out to Claire, who's over in Perth actually. She said to me, she was working in retail at the time in a sex shop. She's like, what do you mean you've never been into one? She's like, there's one literally across the road from where we were studying. You need to go there on your way home. And I was like, all right, I will. I just, for whatever reason, had this barrier around walking in. Now, like you, when I'm traveling, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to check out, see what's going on. One of my favorite ones is in Edinburgh, just off Broughton Street there. They've got a really nice little setup, really generous with their time, very knowledgeable, some really cool, different stuff that I was like, oh, we could get this in Australia. That would be nice. So, yeah, you can kind of add it tourism, just hanging out in the adult stores and seeing what's happening culturally. People do different stuff.
Yeah, and we're really starting to see some new trends in stores to be more high-end, sort of boutique style,
Yeah.
much more friendlier, and I think that's just adding to the appeal of
Yeah.
sex toys, but also I grew up in Hobart. So when our product landed in a Hobart adult store, I got super excited. I sort of felt like I made it. And I made my brother go and take a photo of our product in the store. And I just loved how awkward he was doing that. I loved doing it to him. I didn't need the photo, but I said I needed it.
You're like, come and look at my.
That's it. Yeah. He didn't talk to me for a little while after that, but
All right. So you've learned a lot along the way by the sounds of it in terms of, the nice early days of naivety, new idea, dive straight in, and then a few years down the track being like, oh, with hindsight, maybe like this or that might help. You're working on something new at the moment. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on? Or is it top secret?
Yeah, about to launch Peacock. So one of the sorts of things that I wanted to do was, as I mentioned, create more products so that we could expand the number of people that we could help. And that's why I've decided I'm going out on my own. I've got a pipeline of products that I want to launch, about to launch something new. And it was really after going around a few expos with Luddy and actually speaking to people, just what sort of impact you could have. And yeah, we got into it because we had a very particular desire to help a certain type of person. But then going to expos, I've had people break down in tears in front of me just because they've finally had someone that is talking about sexual health or sexual wellness in a really public place like an expo. And it's just, that's the sort of thing that motivates you to think, what more could I do? How else could I help more people? So yeah, that's decided to go out. And part of the sort of feedback that we got through Luddy was, yeah, this product is great, but it only half meets my needs. If I have more experience with sex or with pleasure, I need something stronger, something that vibrates harder. So yeah, the decision has been made that, yeah, we can do more if we expand the number of products that we have to offer.
That are more specific to a tailored audience.
Yes, exactly. So rather than making something that satisfies or tries to satisfy more than one gender, let's just focus on one product, focus on vulva owners to start with, then we move to penis owners, and we expand the products for all types of people.
Yeah, I mean, in the spinal cord injury community, which is where we do the majority of our work, the womanizer is the go-to. Like every paraplegic, quadriplegic woman that I have spoken to is just sort of like, that's a pretty special product. That's the winner. And I think there's a few things about that, particularly around the clitoral stimulation, the intensity of the vibration, because, you know, when there's a sensory impairment, it does need to be a lot stronger than other things. But even the way the buttons are, the battery, the way they charge it. So, you know, what are some of the other features that you think about when you're designing toys?
My goal in life is to make a pure hands-free device. So no buttons, or it can be completely remote controlled. It's what I had hoped to do with my first product, but it's just been delaying things so much because the technology hasn't been there. So I think around how can we make products easier to use and try to step away from norms like you press and hold the button for 3 seconds. That's how you turn every device on. That is the standard. So the first product they'll launch is just taking steps towards that end goal, making the buttons easier to press, don't have to hold them down for as long to activate the device. It actually, once it's on, you can just squeeze your legs together and the vibration patterns will change.
Or more haptics kind of involved.
And there's pressure sensors on the side of the device, so you're not having to press the button every time you want to change the mode. And then there's the app as well. So there's all these little things that we learned from Luddy that I'm sort of bringing into this device, is just those small things like the braille as well on packaging, on buttons. Magnetic chargers should be standard. People still use these tiny little pinholes to charge some devices.
Terrible, yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be a long journey, and each device hopefully just adds another little piece of accessible features that someone will be able to, makes it a bit easier for some.
Yeah, lovely. One of the things we get a lot of requests or questions about from other clinicians is around like head switch adapted toys, voice activated toys. Like, you know, we were saying for ages, you know, even products like WeVibe and Lovance, you know, they've got their apps that some of the apps are a bit not fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, all of our clients use these home automation systems. The apps need to talk to the home automation system because we already have, hey Siri, hey Google, hey whatever, turn on the lights. Now it also needs to be, hey, turn on my toy. Like, it's just a next step, really, but it needs to talk to the already existing tech. So do you think there's much appetite for people to be working together to let tech talk to tech?
Absolutely. Yep. It's something that I've been passionate about. I think we get a real great opportunity here in Australia with the NDIS. I know it gets its criticisms, but we're really lucky in the way we get to invest in companies, into products, into new design, and that collaboration here in Australia is amazing. I think everyone does see the benefit that our community gets from working together or developing new products. So I've had conversations with people all over Australia around how we can modify, how we can work together. I'm even collaborating with someone in the US who has a certain type of holder for sex toys, and how I can incorporate that and we can work together to make my product fit into their product.
Nice. We talk about the long-handled reacher.
Yes.
The ladder spot. It's very good product. Very well done. Yeah, nice.
I don't know. I'm sure they'll be okay with me saying talking about that, but that's the sort of collaboration that
smart.
I'd love to be able to work with people for.
Yeah, I mean, this whole industry is ripe for innovation. You know, people are looking for very creative ways to bring mainstream items more accessible, and then also creating more accessible design from the very start. And then, of course, the community is probably the most creative out of everyone. You kind of go into people's houses and you're like, oh, is that what you've done? That's a cool idea. A lot of our clients are using their active hand grip, which is what you'd use to do your weights or to put your makeup on, or, yep, also holds your toys. Like, it's a great option too. So
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's different ways of approaching creating products, and you've got mainstream brands trying to create some accessible shoe or something like that. And a lot of the times, it doesn't come off as authentic. It just feels like an attempt to expand a market or try and make money. People see through that, and I think you do have to be really careful around how you create products and how you get people involved in the creation to make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. So you do have to be careful around exactly how you launch products. But I think there's a really great opportunity for assistive tech to go mainstream rather than mainstream trying to create accessible products. I mean, we think about the electric toothbrush, that was assistive tech and it is now mainstream. So I'd love to see a lot more work towards going the other way and mainstream brands trying to recognize the creativity and the types of products that are being created in the assistive tech space.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of the Hot Octopus Pulse Duo, right? Like, it was designed by someone with a spinal cord injury, really to do frenulum stimulation, and then now you find it in every adult store. It's just everybody's using it. So I completely agree with you. When there's a particular market in mind, when there's a particular need to be met, and more often than not, it also meets many other needs. Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking a bit about what needs to be considered in accessible design, ranging from who's the end user, what do they want to do with it. When I run training, we run a thing called Toys, Tools and Assistive Technology. It's like a professional development training for people to be thinking through, well, what kind of features does somebody need? We kind of talk a bit about like who's using it, what do they want to do with it, do they want to grind, hump, insert, the list goes on as to what they're hoping to achieve, how they're going to charge it, where they're going to store it. One of the biggest challenges is usually for folk who have that sort of big care team around them, 24-hour care, who's helping them with setup, who's helping them with cleanup and keeping it easy for the carers and the supports around them to be able to manage it. What are some of your thoughts around design for that?
Before you start looking at, a bigger team, you sort of step back and sort of consider where health professionals can feel a little bit more confident in firstly identifying when someone needs help with their sexual health or their sexual wellness, because a lot of that isn't really taught at university, or you don't really get a lot of that experience when you first step into an organization, especially working with a lot of new grads where I am at the moment. There's a general lack of confidence, let alone feeling confident to talk to someone about their sexual experiences. So it's I definitely see that as a barrier and it is one of the things that I always speak to someone when I first meet them, especially a health professional, is like, what is your experience? What has worked well for you? To try and share that knowledge with other people. So from that perspective, there's a lot of great learnings that people have shared. And I think that collaboration with other team members is really important, especially when you've got multidisciplinary teams working with a particular participant. Getting all aligned and collaborate with each other on, what each person has experienced or seen with a particular person. But I think if there isn't that confidence to begin with, there are a lot of great organisations, obviously Care Rehab in New South Wales. Here in WA, we've got SECA that do a lot of workshops and can actually take that burden off the health professionals if they need to. And a lot of those organisations actually can go into what type of technology exists. As you mentioned, you've got a library of products that you can sort of show people and they can experience. And there's organizations in every state that do a similar sort of thing. If there isn't that confidence or isn't that or some uncertainty about what the next step should be, those sorts of organizations would be a great resource.
Yeah. And for you, in terms of your pathway here, you've got this new product maybe launching sometime this year. Is that your plan?
A couple of months, yeah. It's gone into production just this week, actually. So should be 1 to 2 months. I'll be at Digital Health Fest in Melbourne in May, and then the ATSE Expo in Melbourne as well. I hope to sort of launch it there.
Yeah, nice. We've got the big World Sexual Health Conference here in Australian soil this year in Brisbane in June. Assistive tech will probably be one of those areas that gets chatted about a little bit, particularly in the disability stream, and when to integrate and what to use. It's that whole so from a rehabilitation framework, we kind of talk about, restorative practices, like what can we do to sort of restore pre-injury functioning, and then also compensatory strategies. So what do we need to help with compensating the loss of something? And sex tech and assistive tech is often used in that kind of compensatory strategies. And for some also, it's just good fun and you want to add it into your restorative, as part of like a sex rehabilitation, it can be really helpful in that. And we've got this long history of medical assistive tech, like penile pumps and medical grade vibration and lots of stuff that's been around in different parts of health. But I think kind of what you're experimenting here is going to the community and saying, well, what do you want? What do you need? How can we design that? And also having the conversations in these very like traditionally kind of clinical spaces about sex.
The international conversation or the international perspective, an interesting thing to touch on there is that when you're mentioning people coming here to Australia, is that it's a very different conversation overseas because funding looks very different when it comes to disability services and assistive technology, and that there's not additional funding provided to someone to go out and acquire services or products. They generally are given a salary almost, or like a pension to live off. And when you start talking about sex toys or sexologists or sex workers, a lot of people think, well, I'm struggling to live, I'm struggling to pay rent, struggling to pay food. Why would I allocate some of my funding to sexual health products? Which we've come unstuck with, talking about the NDIS here and how you can use that funding to buy sex toys. Overseas, that looks like an insurance scam. People really struggle with the concept of taking away money that they need to survive to acquire sex toys. It's a very interesting conversation, and I think that healthcare perspective is really important to bridge that gap.
Just Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? Like if basic needs aren't being met, then I had a client once say, sexual well-being is like the cherry on top. Life's good now. There's lots of great stuff. He was back at work. Things were good with his relationship, but he was just like, it's the cherry on top that just kind of comes a few years later down the track when he was, a few other things had been taken care of, and then he had the space. I'm curious how the changes in the NDIS in October last year have maybe impacted on your vision, plan, goal, because they've been quite explicit in saying that sex toys are out. And also in the frequently asked questions, they say assistive technology is in.
There was talk about, especially around sex work. Sex work was the bigger topic, and sex toys sort of slid in a bit underneath as being a lower cost expense. So it wasn't given the attention that sex work was given. I think from my understanding, they've rolled it back, although they are still really conscious around anything related to sex work, sex toys, and they tend to try and miscategorize certain services as sex work, whereas more like intimacy coaches, or sometimes even sex toys get lumped into sex work because it feels like a bit of a vendetta. But that's being driven a lot by this misunderstanding in the general public around how products or how services like sex work are actually prescribed to someone. That just because you have a disability and you have NDIS funding doesn't mean you're allowed to go out and get a sex worker or allowed to get a sex toy. It has to fit within a certain goal. A lot of the times you need to have that collaboration with a healthcare professional like an OT or a sexologist. You can't just go out and get any service you want because you have NDIS funding. So sex toys definitely still part of the funding, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a closer look at when someone purchases the device, and there might really be stricter goals that you need to have in your plan to justify the purchase. It's still quite a low-cost device. I don't know, it might be, I'm sure most of your listeners would know, but any sex toy can be purchased as assistive technology. You don't need a sex toy that's been designed for disability to purchase it. Any sex toy can be purchased using the core budget if the goal is aligned or there is a goal. And it's still a low-cost enough product to not have to worry about justifying it too much.
I would have 100% agreed with you up until October. I would have said to you, yep, sex tech is assistive tech. We can get it through the plans. It was really very simple, especially working with people around their sexuality goals. We would just write a letter of recommendation and it would be funded. And I think since the 3rd of October last year, when they made, sex work went out, but there were so many other changes that went with it, that now it's incredibly difficult to get this past a plan manager, even for someone with a spinal cord injury where there is the New South Wales Health clinical guidelines for the management of sexuality and spinal cord injury include the use of vibration and assistive technology. You can attach evidence, and plan managers are still gatekeeping this issue. That's a bigger issue, that the NDIS doesn't really care about evidence half the time. But the CEO came out and said, under the laws of the NDIS, sexual services cannot be funded, and sexual services are not defined in the legislation. So that in itself is very unhelpful, but are given their ordinary meaning by the NDIA. So she goes on to say that sexual services are taken to include any sexual conduct undertaken with a participant for payment or reward, including direct physical activity between a participant and another person for the purpose of sexual gratification. This includes all services that may be provided by a sex worker. Now, the important thing for, I think, our industry is the second paragraph around her quote, which is the NDIS will continue to provide reasonable and necessary funding to participants to access the disability-related supports and services they need. And this includes other sexuality-related supports. For example, adaptive equipment, sex counselling, individualised sex education, where reasonable and necessary. So that's off the frequently asked questions on the NDIA website. The issue that we've struggled with, clinically, is adaptive equipment. And if it's off the shelf, like I was saying, the Pulse Duo, designed by someone with spinal injury for the spinal community, can buy it in every adult store. It's like $200. They won't pay for it, but they'll pay for the long-handled reacher to attach to it, as if that is needed. The point to this is, how do we argue, or how, health professionals create a case to help people understand that adaptive equipment can be off the shelf? Because we end up, like what we were talking about before, these great innovative ideas end up available to the mainstream, and then suddenly it's mainstream. Therefore, it's no longer a disability item, and then the NDIS won't pay for it. So it's a bit of a difficult, your vision, I'm on board with, accessible design is available for the whole community. But then once it's available for the whole community, the NDIS don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's a difficult spot.
The only idea around the solution that I've had and I've been trying to pursue is having mobility stores in particular. There's a lot of assistive technology stores out there. To get on board with the sexual health, there are some really innovative companies that are starting to sell sex toys, but it is still mainstream. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention certain companies, but I've reached out to Ada Care, for example. Massive company. They've got stores everywhere. If you can get a sex toy into a store like that and they have a range of a few, that would be a much more appealing or something that you could pass through. Plan managers a bit easier, except they don't want to do that. They don't want to have those conversations. I haven't even been able to get a meeting. So to have massive brands like that jump in and to be able to purchase a sex toy and a wheelchair on the same invoice, I think you'd have a better chance.
I think you're quite right there. That's industry. Okay, all right, industry that's listening right now. We need some mainstream assistive tech providers to collaborate on the sexual assistive tech, so that way we can package it all up in a bit more of a palatable way that the NDIA is going to keep funding. Because that change in October was so significantly distressing that for those of us that are working in this space, it doesn't make sense. It's really just like starting a little bushfire over here so everyone can be distracted about the real problems of the NDIS. But anyway, Rob, is there anything else that you want to talk about today?
No, I think we've covered everything. This has been a really great chat.
Yeah, it's been lovely to have you with us, just talking about design and accessible features and sort of what it is in terms of the process of designing new innovation and new equipment. Good luck with the launch of your latest venture later in the year. Look forward to kind of seeing how that goes. How can people find you? What are your socials if they want to follow your work?
Company name's called Peacock, and it's PCOCK. Dropped an E and an A. Yeah, Peacock will be launching soon.
Yeah, nice. Lovely. Thanks so much for your time today and for having this conversation. And have a great afternoon.
It's been a pleasure, Candice. Thank you.
A big thanks to Rob for his time today, sharing his work and learnings with us. And we hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Really Good Sex Chat. Please jump into Spotify and rate our episode and this podcast so that others can find it too. And if you have any specific questions about how sexual assistive technology might be useful in your own personal circumstances, please feel free to head over to carerehab.com.au and reach out and get in touch with our team. We'd love to talk with you more about this topic and how it might be relevant for you. So thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to being with you next time.